I can still smell it, that mix of hot popcorn, car exhaust, and summer grass that meant the Starlight Drive-In was open for business. For 40 years that smell was my life. My name is Frank Morrison, and I was the projectionist at the Starlight Drive-In Theatre from the summer of 1955 until we closed our gates for the last time in 1995. I'm 87 years old now, sitting in my living room in Riverside, California, and I can hear kids playing outside, their laughter drifting through my window. It's a warm June evening, the kind of evening when the Starlight would have been getting ready to open. The sun would be setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and cars would already be lining up at the entrance, their radios playing, kids bouncing in the back seats with excitement. But the Starlight is gone now. The lot where it stood is a shopping center, a Walmart, a Starbucks, a cellular phone store, places that stay open all day, every day, selling things people don't really need. Not like the drive-in, which only opened when the sun went down and sold something you couldn't get anywhere else. Magic. I started working at the Starlight in June of 1955. I was 23 years old, fresh out of the Navy, looking for something steady. The owner, a man named Dutch Kowalski, hired me on the spot. "You know anything about projectors, kid?" he asked, chomping on an unlit cigar. "No, sir," I admitted. "Good," he said. "Then you got nothing to unlearn. I'll teach you right. Being a projectionist isn't just about threading film and keeping focus. It's about understanding that you're holding people's dreams in your hands. 400 cars out there, maybe 1,000 people, and they're all trusting you to transport them somewhere else for 2 hours. Don't ever forget that." I never did. The projection booth at the Starlight was on the second floor of the concession building, a small room with 2 projectors, shelves full of film canisters, and one large window that looked out over the entire lot. From that window I could see everything, all 400 parking spaces arranged in perfect rows, each one with its own speaker post, all facing the massive screen that stood like a white monolith against the California sky. That window became my world, my observation post, my private seat to the greatest show on earth, and I'm not talking about the movies. See, here's what most people don't understand about drive-in theaters. Yes, there was a movie playing on that giant screen, but the real movie, the one that changed every single night, was happening in those cars. From my projection booth, I watched America live its life. I saw first kisses and marriage proposals. I saw families with kids in pajamas sharing popcorn and pointing at the screen. I saw teenagers trying to look cool while working up the courage to hold hands. I saw old couples who'd been coming to the drive-in for 30 years, still choosing to spend their Saturday nights together under the stars. I saw America fall in love, one car at a time. My first night on the job was a double feature, East of Eden with James Dean, followed by Mr. Roberts with Henry Fonda. Dutch showed me how to thread the projector, how to time the changeover between reels, how to adjust the focus and sound. "The audience shouldn't even know you exist," he told me. "If they're thinking about the projectionist, it means you screwed up." The sun set around 8 o'clock that June evening. The speaker posts crackled to life with previews and advertisements, local businesses mostly, the ones that sponsored the drive-in. Visit Mel's Auto Repair for all your car needs. Sally's Beauty Parlor, where Riverside's loveliest ladies get lovely. The voices were cheerful, optimistic, full of that post-war American confidence that anything was possible. Cars kept arriving, their headlights sweeping across the lot as they found their spots. Families with wood-paneled station wagons. Teenagers in souped-up hot rods with chrome that gleamed in the twilight. Young couples in modest Chevys and Fords, sitting close together even though the bench seats had plenty of room. I stood at my window watching them settle in, watching kids climb into the back of station wagons making nests out of blankets and pillows, watching teenagers pass bottles of Coca-Cola back and forth, watching a young man in a Navy uniform. I recognized that uniform, had worn it myself, put his arm around his girl's shoulders, tentative, hopeful. Dutch stood beside me, arms crossed, surveying his kingdom. "See that?" he said, pointing to a car in the third row where a man was lifting a small boy onto his shoulders. "The kid's gonna remember this night for the rest of his life. Might not remember the movie, but he'll remember being here with his dad under the stars, feeling special. That's what we do here, Frank. We don't just show movies, we make memories." The cartoon started, a Warner Brothers short with Bugs Bunny, and I heard laughter drift up from the lot, carried on the warm night breeze. Then came the feature presentation logo, the fanfare music swelling through hundreds of speakers, and suddenly there was James Dean, young and beautiful and doomed, flickering 30 feet tall against the California night. I ran back to my projector, keeping one eye on the film threading through the gate, one eye on that window. And I realized Dutch was right. This wasn't just a job. This was a sacred trust. All those people out there had chosen to spend their evening here, had paid their $1.50 per car, had driven to this lot in the middle of nowhere because they believed in something. They believed in escape, in romance, in the possibility that for 2 hours, they could forget about their bills and their worries and just be transporting somewhere else. And I was the one who made that transportation possible. As James Dean's face filled that enormous screen, as the story unfolded in light and shadow, I looked out at my audience. Some were watching intently, some were talking, laughing, living their own stories parallel to the one on screen. And I thought, this is America, right here, right now, in this drive-in lot in Riverside, California. This is what we are, dreamers and lovers and families and rebels, all gathered together under the stars, believing that anything is possible. That first night at the Starlight, I fell in love not with a person but with a place, with a moment, with the idea that I could spend my life in this small booth, watching the world through a window, being part of something beautiful and temporary and perfect. I worked at the Starlight Drive-In for 40 years, 40 summers of threading film and changing reels, 40 summers of watching America through that projection booth window, 40 summers of being the invisible hand that made the magic happen. And tonight, 30 years after we closed, I want to tell you about what I saw, about the stories that unfolded in those cars while other stories flickered on the screen, about the love and loss and life that happened in the Starlight Drive-In Theatre between 1955 and 1995. Let me tell you about the real movie I watched for 40 years. Let me tell you about the summer screen. The summer of 1957 was when I learned that drive-in theaters weren't just about movies, they were about moments that changed people's lives forever. It was a Saturday night in July, hot and sticky the way California summers get when the air just sits there heavy and still. We were showing An Affair to Remember with Cary Grant and Deborah Kaya, one of those romantic pictures that had the ladies reaching for their handkerchiefs and the men pretending they weren't getting a little misty-eyed too. By 57, I knew the rhythm of the drive-in like I knew my own heartbeat. I could tell what kind of night it would be just by watching the cars arrive. Families came early, wanting the center spots with the best view. Teenagers came later, parking in the back rows where the shadows were deeper, and nobody asked too many questions about whether they were actually watching the movie. And then there were the regulars, the couples who came every Saturday night without fail, always choosing the same parking space, same as some people always sat in the same pew at church. Space 127 was one of those regular spots, third row from the back, left side, with a clear view of the screen but enough distance from the concession stand that you had some privacy. Every Saturday night for the past year, like clockwork, a powder blue 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air would pull into that space at exactly 7:30. The car belonged to a young man named Robert Chen. I knew his name because I made it my business to know the regulars. Robert was 24, 25 maybe, worked as an engineer at one of the aerospace plants that were popping up all over Southern California. He was Chinese-American, always wore neat slacks and a pressed shirt, always opened the car door for his girl like a gentleman. His girl was named Margaret Sullivan, Maggie, he called her. She was a school teacher, blonde hair that she wore in one of those neat flips that were fashionable then, with a smile that could light up the whole drive-in lot. She was white, which in 1957 California meant that when they walked into the concession stand together, people noticed. Some stared, some whispered, some looked away with tight mouths and narrowed eyes. But out here in Space 127, with the California sky darkening above them and the movie about to start, they could just be Robert and Maggie. Just two people in love, like hundreds of other couples scattered across the lot. I'd been watching them for a year the way I watched all my regulars, not in a creepy way, I wasn't some peeping Tom. But from my booth I had a bird's-eye view of the whole lot, and you couldn't help but notice patterns, habits, rituals. Robert and Maggie had their routine. They'd arrive at 7:30, park in 127, and Robert would go to the concession stand while Maggie waited in the car, fixing her hair in the rearview mirror. He'd come back with popcorn, 2 Cokes, and a box of Milk Duds, always the same order. They'd sit close together on the bench seat, Maggie tucking herself under Robert's arm, and they'd watch the movie with the kind of attention that said they were actually there for the picture, not just using the drive-in as a make-out spot. But this Saturday night was different. I could tell the moment Robert's Bel Air pulled into the lot. He was driving slower than usual, more carefully, like he was carrying something precious. When he parked in Space 127, he sat there for a long moment before getting out of the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Maggie said something to him. I couldn't hear from the booth, of course, but I could read body language after 2 years of watching people. She put her hand on his arm. He nodded, took a deep breath, and got out. But instead of going to the concession stand like he always did, he walked around to her side of the car and opened her door, offered his hand. She took it, confused, and he helped her out of the Bel Air. Then he did something I'd never seen him do before. He spread a blanket on the hood of the car, the way families did when they wanted to sit outside and watch the movie under the stars. From my projection booth window, I watched as they climbed up onto the hood together, sitting side by side with their backs against the windshield, looking up at the screen that wasn't showing anything yet except the Starlight logo and the words, "Our feature presentation will begin shortly." The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and amber. The speaker posts crackled with the final announcements, concession stand closing in 5 minutes, and the lot was full of the sounds of summer, kids laughing, car doors slamming, the distant hum of the highway. I had 10 minutes before I needed to start the first reel, so I stayed at my window watching Space 127. Something was happening. I could feel it the way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Robert was talking, animated, his hands moving. Maggie was listening, perfectly still. Then I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out something small that caught the dying sunlight. Even from the booth, I could tell what it was. A ring. My heart started pounding. In 2 years of working the Starlight, I'd seen a lot of things, but I'd never witnessed a marriage proposal. Not from start to finish. Not from my window to America's heart. Robert was holding the ring and he was talking, and Maggie had both hands over her mouth. I couldn't see if she was crying, but her shoulders were shaking. The sky kept darkening, going from gold to purple, and all around them hundreds of people were settling into their cars, adjusting their speakers, opening bags of popcorn, completely unaware that in Space 127, a man was asking a woman to spend her life with him. I should have gone to my projector, should have started threading the first reel, but I couldn't move. I was frozen at that window, watching this moment unfold, feeling like if I looked away I might break something sacred. Maggie lowered her hands from her mouth. She was crying, I could tell now even from this distance. She said something, one word, short and simple. And then Robert was putting the ring on her finger, and they were kissing, and even though I couldn't hear anything over the noise of the lot, I felt like I could hear their hearts beating, feel their joy radiating out like heat from the summer pavement. Kid, we starting this picture or what? Dutch's voice broke through my reverie. He was standing in the doorway of the booth, looking at me with one eyebrow raised. Yeah, sorry, I said, hurrying to the projector. Just got distracted. By what? Dutch walked to the window and looked out. What's so interesting in Space 127? A proposal, I said, threading the film with hands that were shaking slightly. He just proposed, she said yes. Dutch was quiet for a moment, looking out at the powder blue Bel Air with the couple on the hood. Then he smiled, a rare sight. Dutch wasn't much of a smiler. Well, hell, he said softly. That's something, isn't it? That's really something. Should we, I don't know, should we do something? Announce it or something? Dutch shook his head. No, you don't interrupt a moment like that. You just let it be. They chose this place this night to start the rest of their lives. The Starlight gets to be part of their story now. That's honor enough. He was right, of course. So I started the projector, and the opening credits of An Affair to Remember began to roll, and Cary Grant's handsome face appeared on the screen, 30 feet tall and impossibly glamorous. But I kept sneaking glances at Space 127. Robert and Maggie had climbed down from the hood and gotten back into the Bel Air, but they weren't watching the movie. They were looking at the ring, at each other, talking excitedly. Every few minutes Maggie would hold up her hand, letting what little light remained catch the diamond, and Robert would kiss her hand, her cheek, her lips. About halfway through the movie, right around the part where Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr are on the ship, falling in love despite themselves, I saw the Bel Air's interior light come on. Maggie had opened her door and was getting out. She walked toward the concession stand, but then she stopped, turned, and looked up at the projection booth. She waved. I don't know how she knew I was watching. Maybe she'd noticed me at the window before. Maybe she just felt eyes on her. But she waved, and she was smiling so wide I could see it even in the darkness, and she held up her left hand, showing me the ring. I waved back, grinning like an idiot, and gave her a thumbs up. She laughed. I could see her laughing even though I couldn't hear it, and then she continued to the concession stand. When she came back to Space 127 a few minutes later, she was carrying a Coca-Cola and a box of Milk Duds. But she also had something else, a piece of paper that she held up toward the projection booth, pressing it against the windshield so I could read it. Even from this distance, even in the darkness broken only by the glow from the screen, I could make out what it said. Thank you for being part of our night, Maggie and Robert. I felt my throat get tight, felt tears prick at my eyes, and I thought, this is why I do this job. Not for the $60 a week Dutch pays me, not for the free popcorn, but for moments like this, for being a witness to life's most important scenes, for being the invisible hand that makes the magic happen while real magic happens in the parking lot below. The movie played on. Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr fell in love, made their plan to meet at the Empire State Building, faced their tragedy and their triumph. And in Space 127, Robert and Maggie sat together, newly engaged, watching a love story on screen while living their own love story in real time. When the movie ended and the lights came up, the lot lights, I mean, the ones that told everyone it was time to go home, Robert and Maggie sat in their car for a long time. Other cars were starting up, filing out toward the exit, but they just sat there, not wanting the night to end. not wanting to leave this place where they'd begun there forever. Finally, Robert started the Bel Air, but before he drove away, he turned on his headlights and blinked them 3 times, the universal signal for thank you at a drive-in. I blinked the projection booth light back at them. And then they were gone, rolling slowly toward the exit, joining the stream of red taillights leaving the Starlight, heading back into the world. I never saw that powder blue Bel Air again. Space 127 stayed empty the following Saturday and the Saturday after that. I asked around, asked Dutch if he'd heard anything, but nobody knew what happened to them. Maybe they moved away. Maybe they got married and started going to indoor theaters like respectable married couples were supposed to. Maybe they just stopped coming, the way people do when life changes and old habits don't fit anymore. But I never forgot them. Never forgot the image of Robert on that hood, holding up a ring while the California sky burned gold behind him. Never forgot Maggie's wave, her smile, her note pressed against the windshield. 20 years later, in 1977, I was reading the newspaper. This was back when I still read the paper every morning, and I came across an article about a lawsuit. A Chinese-American engineer named Robert Chen was suing an aerospace company for discrimination. The article included a photo. I recognized him immediately. Older, grayer, but those were the same eyes that had looked so nervous and hopeful in Space 127 20 years before. The article mentioned that he was married to a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they had 3 children. They'd made it, despite the stares and the whispers and the challenges that a mixed-race couple would have faced in 1950s America. They'd made it. They'd built a life together. They'd had the courage to love each other in a time and place that didn't always want them to. And it had started here in Space 127 on a Saturday night in July, while An Affair to Remember played on the screen and I watched from my window, bearing witness to something beautiful and brave. That's what the drive-in was, really. It was a place where people could be themselves, where a Chinese engineer and a white schoolteacher could sit together without judgment, where love could bloom in the darkness, protected by the magic of the movies and the kindness of strangers who looked away from what didn't concern them and focused on the screen. It was a place where America could be what it always promised to be, free. By 1962, the Starlight Drive-In had become more than just a job to me, it was my life. I'd worked there for 7 years, and in that time I'd learned to read the parking lot the way a sailor reads the ocean. Every car had a story. Every night was a new chapter in the ongoing saga of American life. The early 60s were a golden time for drive-ins. The post-war baby boom meant families everywhere, and families meant station wagons, those massive wood-paneled boats on wheels that could hold 6, 7, sometimes 8 people if you squeezed. Every weekend they'd pour into the Starlight like a migration, loaded down with kids and blankets and thermoses of Kool-Aid. There was one station wagon I remember better than all the others, a 1960 Ford Country Squire, light blue with the fake wood paneling on the sides. It belonged to a family named the Harrisons, and they came to the Starlight every Friday night from May through September, regular as clockwork. I first noticed them in the summer of '62. The father, Tom Harrison, was maybe 35, with the crew cut and broad shoulders of a former military man. His wife, Dorothy, everyone called her Dottie, was one of those women who always looked put together even in casual clothes, her dark hair styled in a neat bouffant, her lipstick perfect even at the drive-in. But it was the kids who really caught my attention. 4 of them stair-stepped in age, Tommy Jr., about 12, Susan maybe 10, the twins, Bobby and Betty, around 7. And the way they piled out of that station wagon every Friday night was like watching a circus unload, a controlled chaos of arms and legs and excited voices. They had a system, the Harrisons. They'd arrive around 7 o'clock, early enough to get a good spot in the center section. Tom would back the country squire into the space, always backed in so the kids could sit in the open tailgate with their feet dangling out. Dottie would lay out blankets in the back, creating a nest where the younger kids could sprawl. Tommy Jr., being the oldest, got to sit in the front seat like a grown-up, manning the speaker that hooked onto the window. Then Tom would take orders, who wants popcorn, who wants candy, Susan, you want junior mints again, and march to the concession stand like a general provisioning his troops. He'd come back loaded down with treats, passing them out with the seriousness of a man distributing important resources. And Dottie would sit in the passenger seat with a small suitcase that she'd open once everything settled down. Inside was everything a mother might need for a night at the drive-in: baby wipes for sticky hands, band-aids for mysterious injuries, a hairbrush for tangles, a sweater for when the night got cool, aspirin for headaches, tissues for tears or runny noses. That woman runs the drive-in like a military operation, Dutch observed one night, watching through the booth window as Dottie efficiently dealt with some crisis involving Bobby and a spilled Coca-Cola. Eisenhower could have used her in the war. The Harrisons came every Friday without fail that summer, They'd watch whatever was playing, Disney pictures mostly, but also comedies and adventure films. The Music Man with Robert Preston, To Kill a Mockingbird with Gregory Peck. The Longest Day, though Tom sent Dottie and the kids to the concession stand during the violent parts of that one. I watched him sit alone in the station wagon, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel, and I wondered what he was remembering from whatever war he'd fought in. What struck me most about the Harrisons wasn't just that they came every week, it was how they were together. The way Tom would absently reach over and squeeze Dottie's hand during romantic scenes. The way Dottie would turn around every few minutes to check on the kids, smoothing hair, adjusting blankets, making sure everyone was happy. The way the kids would argue and tease, but never meanly, never cruelly, just the way siblings do when they're secure in being loved. They looked like a commercial for the American dream, like something out of a Saturday Evening Post cover. The perfect family in the perfect station wagon at the perfect drive-in on a perfect summer night. But here's what I learned that summer: perfect is just what things look like from the outside. From the projection booth window, up close, perfect always has cracks in it. It was mid-July, a Friday night showing of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance with John Wayne and James Stewart. The Harrisons arrived at their usual time, parked in their usual spot, went through their usual routine, but something was off. I could feel it from the booth, the way you can feel a storm coming even before the sky gets dark. Tom and Dottie weren't talking. Oh, they were going through the motions. He took the concession stand orders, she organized the back of the wagon, but there was a distance between them. A coldness. When he came back with the snacks, he handed them through the window without looking at her. She took them without saying thank you. The kids felt it too. I could see it in the way they were quieter than usual, the way Tommy Jr. kept glancing at his parents with worried eyes, the way little Betty clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter than normal. The movie started. John Wayne rode across the screen, larger than life, the epitome of American masculinity. But in the Harrison station wagon, nobody was watching. Tom sat rigid in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead but not seeing. Dottie kept her face turned toward the passenger window, away from him. The kids were restless, picking at their popcorn, whispering among themselves. About halfway through the movie, I saw Dottie get out of the car. She stood beside it for a moment, arms wrapped around herself even though it wasn't cold, and then she walked away from the parking area, toward the back fence where there was nothing but darkness and the sound of the highway in the distance. A few minutes later, Tom got out too. He said something to Tommy Jr., probably telling him to watch his siblings, and then he walked in the same direction Dottie had gone. I shouldn't have watched, it wasn't my business, but from the projection booth I could see them standing by that back fence, two silhouettes against the glow from the screen. I could see Dottie's shoulders shaking. I could see Tom reach for her, see her pull away, see him drop his hands helplessly to his sides. They stood like that for a long time, not touching, not talking, just standing in the darkness at the edge of the Starlight Drive-In, while John Wayne delivered justice on the screen, and their children sat in a station wagon wondering where their parents had gone. Then something changed. Tom moved closer. He put his hand on Dottie's shoulder, and this time she didn't pull away. She turned toward him and he wrapped his arms around her and she buried her face in his chest. They stood like that, holding each other in the darkness, and I felt like I was witnessing something intensely private, something I had no right to see. But I couldn't look away. After a few minutes they walked back to the station wagon together, Tom's arm around Dottie's shoulders, her arm around his waist. When they got to the car, Dottie climbed into the back with the kids instead of sitting in the front. She gathered all 4 children close to her, and Tom climbed in after her, and suddenly all 6 Harrisons were crammed in the back of that station wagon, pressed together in one big tangle of arms and legs and love. They stayed like that for the rest of the movie, all piled together, and I saw Tom kiss the top of Dottie's head, saw her lean into him, saw the kids relax as the tension that had been crackling through their little family finally dissipated. I never knew what the fight was about. Money, probably, it usually was in those days. Or maybe the stress of raising 4 kids on one salary. Or maybe just the accumulated weight of life, pressing down until something had to give. But I knew what I'd witnessed, a family that had almost broken and then chosen not to. A couple who'd remembered, standing by that back fence in the darkness, why they'd gotten married in the first place. Parents who decided that whatever was wrong, it wasn't as important as the 4 kids waiting for them in the station wagon. The Harrisons kept coming every Friday for the rest of that summer, and the next summer, and the summer after that. I watched those kids grow up in the back of that station wagon, watched Tommy Jr. get his driver's license and start bringing his own dates to the drive-in, watched Susan turn from a pigtailed little girl into a teenager who thought she was too cool for family night but came anyway, watched the twins lose their baby faces and become real people with personalities and opinions. By 1968, the family dynamic had shifted. The kids were teenagers and preteens now, too old for the magic of the drive-in but still loyal to the Friday night tradition. They'd sit in the back of the station wagon with their own friends sometimes, and Tom and Dottie would sit up front, reclaiming the space they'd given up for so many years. And sometimes on quiet nights between reels, I'd see Tom reach across the bench seat and take Dottie's hand, and she'd scoot closer to him the way young couples did, even though they'd been married 15 years and had 4 kids and a mortgage, and all the complications that come with building a life together. They were still choosing each other, still showing up every Friday, still making it work. The last time I saw the Harrison station wagon was in the summer of 1970. The kids were nearly grown by then. Tommy Jr. was about to leave for college, Susan was 17 and boy crazy, the twins were teenagers with their own lives and interests. The Friday night tradition had started to fray. Sometimes only 2 or 3 of them would come, sometimes just Tom and Dottie. But this particular night in August, all 6 of them were there. The whole family crammed into that agging station wagon one more time. They watched Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I remember because it was a late second-run showing, the movie having come out the year before. When the movie ended and the parking lot started to empty, the Harrison wagon stayed put. I watched as Tom got out and climbed into the back with his family. All 6 of them sat together in the twilight of the lot lights, just talking, laughing, holding on to something they all knew was ending. Tommy Jr. was leaving for Berkeley in 2 weeks. Susan would follow the next year. Soon the twins would be gone too. The station wagon summers were coming to an end and they all knew it. This was their last perfect Friday night, their last time all together in this place that had been their family tradition for 8 years. When they finally pulled out of the lot that night, Tom honked the horn 3 short beeps, the same goodbye signal Robert Chen had given me 8 years earlier. I blinked the booth lights back at them. I never saw that light blue country squire again. But every summer after that, whenever I saw a station wagon pull into the lot loaded down with kids and blankets and thermoses, I thought about the Harrisons, about how they'd used the Starlight as a place to be a family, about that night in 1962 when their marriage almost broke and they chose to fix it, about 8 years of Friday nights, of shared popcorn and whispered conversations and kids growing up under the stars. The drive-in gave them that, a place to gather, a reason to come together every week, a tradition that held them steady through whatever storms they weathered at home. That's what the Starlight was really selling, I realized, not movies, not entertainment, but time, shared time, family time, the kind of time that builds memories strong enough to last a lifetime. The kind of time we don't seem to have anymore, now that everyone's busy, now that every kid has their own screen, now that families scatter to their separate corners and only come together for the big holidays. But for 8 summers in the 1960s, the Harrisons had their Friday nights, and I got to watch from my window, bearing witness to a family choosing each other, over and over again, in the glow of a movie screen under the California stars. If you were alive in 1969, you remember where you were. You remember what the world felt like that year, like everything was changing too fast, like the ground beneath your feet was shifting and you couldn't quite get your balance. The war in Vietnam was on the news every night. Young people were protesting, growing their hair long, questioning everything their parents believed in. The music was getting louder, stranger, angrier, and in July we put men on the moon. The drive-in reflected all of it. I could see the changes happening in the parking lot, could watch America transforming car by car, night by night. The station wagons were still there, but there were fewer of them now. More young people came in their own cars, Volkswagen Beetles with peace signs painted on them, motorcycles with riders in leather jackets, pickup trucks with rifle racks in the back windows. The lot became a patchwork of different Americas, all trying to watch the same movie but seeing different things. That summer we showed Easy Rider for 3 weeks straight. Dutch wasn't sure about it at first. It wasn't exactly family-friendly with all that drug content and anti-establishment sentiment, but it packed the lot every single night. Young people came in droves, some of them sitting on the hoods of their cars, some dancing in front of the screen during the motorcycle scenes, some so stoned they probably couldn't have told you what movie they were watching. "This is what's wrong with America," Dutch would mutter, watching from the booth as kids passed joints between cars. No respect, no values, no damn sense. But I saw something different. I saw kids trying to figure out who they were in a world that seemed to be falling apart. I saw them reaching for each other, creating their own communities right there in the parking lot. And I saw parents in station wagons sitting with their teenage children trying to understand what this movie meant, why their kids connected with it, what had changed between their generation and this new one. It was a Wednesday night in late July, I remember, because it was 2 days after the moon landing, and everyone was still buzzing about Neil Armstrong walking on lunar dust while we stood on California asphalt. We were showing a double feature, 2001, A Space Odyssey followed by Planet of the Apes. Sci-fi night capitalizing on the space fever gripping the country. Around 8:30, a car pulled into the lot that made me do a double take. It was a 1967 Mustang cherry red with chrome that gleamed even in the twilight. But that's not what caught my attention. It was the two men inside. They were both in their mid-20s, both wearing neat button-down shirts and slacks, conservative clothes that marked them as different from the long-haired kids scattered around the lot. They parked in the back corner, the spot farthest from the concession stand, where the shadows were deepest. Now I need you to understand something about 1969. What I'm about to tell you was illegal then, not just frowned upon, actually illegal. People went to jail for it, lost their jobs, got beaten up, sometimes worse. These two men were on a date. I'd seen it before over the years, though not often. Two men or two women who'd come to the drive-in together, parking in the back corners, hoping the darkness would give them the same privacy it gave straight couples. Most people didn't notice or didn't care. The drive-in was a place where you minded your own business, but occasionally there'd be trouble. Some drunk guy would see something he didn't like and decide to make it his problem. Dutch had thrown out more than one troublemaker over the years, though he never said why. Just, get the hell out of my drive-in. I watched the red Mustang, feeling protective in a way I couldn't quite explain. The two men sat in the front seat, a careful distance between them, and when one of them went to the concession stand, the other stayed in the car. They were being cautious, smart. The lot filled up around them. Families, teenagers, couples, all the usual Friday night crowd, even though it was Wednesday. The moon landing had everyone feeling celebratory, feeling like anything was possible. We'd gone to the moon, for Christ's sake, what couldn't we do? 2001, A Space Odyssey started, and the parking lot fell into the familiar hush of opening credits. Stanley Kubrick's vision of space travel flickered across the screen, slow, deliberate, beautiful. HAL 9000's red eye watched the audience, and somewhere in the back of the lot, two men watched back, sitting just a little closer now that darkness had fallen and the movie provided cover. I was about 40 minutes into my routine. I could run a projector in my sleep by then when I heard shouting from the lot. Not the good kind of shouting, not kids being rowdy or someone cheering at an exciting scene. The bad kind, the kind that makes your stomach drop. I looked out the booth window and saw trouble heading toward the red Mustang. Three guys, early 20s, stumbling drunk, pointing and laughing. Even from the booth I could read the situation. They'd noticed the two men. They'd decided to do something about it. Dutch, I called. He was in the back room counting concession receipts. What? Troubled back corner, the Mustang. Dutch was at the window in 2 seconds flat. He took one look and his jaw tightened. Got 'em it, call the police. Then stay here and keep that projector running no matter what you hear. He was out the door before I could respond, moving faster than I'd ever seen a 60-year-old man move. I should have called the police, should have stayed at my post like Dutch said, but I couldn't. I ran to the window and watched. The three drunk guys had reached the Mustang. They were yelling, banging on the hood. The two men inside had separated, pressed against their respective doors, trying to look like just two friends watching a movie. But it was too late. The damage was done. They'd been seen. One of the drunks tried to open the driver's side door. It was locked. He started rocking the car and his buddies joined in, and the Mustang was shaking on its suspension while Stanley Kubrick's apes discovered tools on the giant screen overhead. Then Dutch arrived. I couldn't hear what he said from the booth, but I saw the effect. All three drunks stopped and turned to look at him. Dutch wasn't a big man, but he had that military bearing, that command presence that made you listen whether you wanted to or not. One of the drunks said something, probably something along the lines of mind your own business, and took a step toward Dutch. Big mistake. Dutch didn't hit him, didn't need to. He just stood there, arms crossed, and stared the guy down with a look that said he'd seen real violence, real danger, and three drunk idiots in a drive-in parking lot didn't even register. The drunk stepped back. Dutch pointed toward the exit, said something short. Two of the drunks started walking. The third hesitated, looked back at the Mustang, but his friends grabbed him and pulled him along. Within minutes they were gone, taillights disappearing into the California night. Dutch walked to the Mustang and knocked on the window. The driver rolled it down a crack. They talked for a minute, Dutch's body language casual, friendly. He was giving them the option to leave, I realized, giving them an out if they felt unsafe. But they stayed. After Dutch walked back toward the concession building, the Mustang sat there in its shadowy corner, and 2001, A Space Odyssey, continued its slow, hypnotic journey through space and time. When Dutch climbed back up to the booth, he was breathing hard, his shirt damp with sweat. He didn't say anything, just stood at the window for a minute, watching the lot. "You didn't call the cops," he finally said. "No, sir." "Good, they didn't need cops, they needed someone to stand up for them." He paused. You know what those boys were? Yes, sir. You got a problem with it. I thought about the question, thought about everything I'd been taught in church, in school, about what was normal and right. Then I thought about 8 years of watching people through this window, watching them love each other in all kinds of ways, watching them find happiness in a world that was often cruel and hard. No, sir, I said, I don't have a problem with it. Dutch nodded. Good, neither do I. Love's hard enough without people making it harder. This is a drive-in theatre. People come here to watch movies and be with whoever they want to be with. That's the only rule that matters. We stood together at the window watching the lot, watching America in all its messy, complicated, beautiful diversity. And I thought, this is what the future looks like. Not the sanitized, everyone the same future of 2001, A Space Odyssey, or the dystopian nightmare of Planet of the Apes. But this, all these different kinds of people trying to exist together, sometimes peacefully, sometimes with conflict, but all of them here, all of them watching the same screen under the same stars. The red Mustang stayed until the end of the double feature. When Planet of the Apes finished with its devastating final shot of the Statue of Liberty buried in sand, when the lot lights came up and cars started filing out, the Mustang finally moved. But before leaving, it pulled up beside the concession building. The driver got out and walked to the window where Dutch sold tickets. I watched from the booth as they talked. Then the driver reached into his wallet and pulled out some bills, more than the admission price, definitely more. He was trying to give Dutch money, a thank you. Dutch waved it away, said something that made the driver's shoulders relax, made him smile. They shook hands. Then the driver got back in his red Mustang and he and his companion drove away into the summer night. What did you tell him? I asked when Dutch came back to the booth. Told him to come back anytime. Told him everyone's welcome at the Starlight as long as they respect the other guests and don't talk during the movie. Dutch looked at me. That's the truth, Frank. Everyone's welcome. That's what America's supposed to mean. I thought about Dutch's words a lot over the years, about how the drive-in was a place where different Americas came together, where the old and the young, the conservative and the radical, the conventional and the unconventional could all park side by side and watch the same story unfold. It wasn't always peaceful. There were arguments, sometimes fights. The culture war of the late 60s and early 70s played out in microcosm in the Starlight parking lot, but there was something about the shared experience, all of us under the stars, all of us watching that giant screen, that reminded us we were part of the same story. The summer of '69 was the summer I learned that running a drive-in theatre was a political act. Every time Dutch sold a ticket to someone who didn't fit the Norman Rockwell version of America, every time I threaded a film that challenged the status quo, every time we created a space where different kinds of people could exist together, we were making a statement about what kind of country we believed in. We believed in the messy one, the complicated one, the one where people disagreed but still shared the popcorn, the one where love came in all configurations and everyone deserved a dark corner where they could hold hands without fear. That's the America I saw from my projection booth window. And despite everything, despite the war and the protests and the assassinations, and all the ways the country seemed to be tearing itself apart, I still believed in it. I still believed we could all watch the same movie together. The 1970s brought a different kind of shadow to the Starlight. The Vietnam War was ending, but the men who'd fought it were coming home, and they brought the war with them in ways that didn't show up on the evening news. I'd been through this before in a way. I was Navy during Korea, though I never saw combat, spent most of my service stateside, working on a base in San Diego. But I knew plenty of guys who'd been in the thick of it, and I'd seen what war did to men, how it changed them, how some of them came home in their bodies but left their souls somewhere else. Vietnam was different though. Those boys came home to a country that didn't want to look at them, didn't want to hear their stories, didn't want to admit what we'd sent them to do. They came back to protests and anger and a national shame that somehow got transferred onto them instead of onto the politicians who'd sent them there. And some of them came to the Starlight. It started in the fall of 1971. We were showing Patton for a second-run engagement, George C. Scott playing the legendary general, all fire and fury and American exceptionalism. It was a war movie, but a clean one. The kind where you could tell the good guys from the bad guys, where victory meant something, where sacrifice had purpose. A group of 4 guys showed up in an old Chevy pickup, probably mid-20s, all wearing surplus military jackets even though it was 70 degrees outside. They parked toward the back and sat in the truck bed, passing a bottle in a paper bag between them, not causing trouble, just drinking quietly and watching the movie. About halfway through, one of them started shouting, not at anyone in particular, just shouting, angry, incoherent words that cut through the night and the movie soundtrack. His friends grabbed him, held him, talked to him in low, urgent voices until he quieted down. Then they got in the truck and left, tires kicking up dust as they peeled out of the lot. Dutch and I watched from the booth window. Vietnam, Dutch said quietly. It wasn't a question. How can you tell? I've seen it before. Korea, World War II, they come back different. Some of them can't handle the war movies anymore. It's too close, too real. He shook his head. Poor bastards. The next week they came back. Same 4 guys, same truck, same spot in the back of the lot. We were showing The French Connection, not a war movie, just a gritty cop thriller. They made it through the whole thing without incident. They kept coming back, every week, sometimes twice a week. Always the same guys, always parking in the same area. And slowly other guys like them started showing up too. Young men with long hair and military jackets, with eyes that had seen too much, with a way of holding themselves that said they were ready for danger even when there wasn't any. The Starlight developed an unspoken reputation as a place where Vietnam vets were welcome, where nobody bothered them, nobody thanked them for their service in that awkward way that made everything worse, nobody asked them questions they didn't want to answer. They could just sit in their cars or on their tailgates and watch movies and be left alone with their thoughts and their buddies who understood in ways nobody else could. By 1973, there was a whole section of the lot, the back left corner, that had become unofficial veteran territory, not because anyone assigned it or because there was a sign. It just happened organically. The vets gravitated there and other people gave them space. Dutch noticed, of course. Dutch noticed everything. We're running a de facto VFW hall out there, he said one night, watching the cluster of military jackets and pickup trucks in that back corner. Should probably charge them membership dues. But he didn't charge them anything extra. In fact, I noticed he started running more of the movies. They seemed to prefer action films, westerns, anything that wasn't directly about Vietnam. He'd tried showing The Green Berets with John Wayne in '72, thinking they'd appreciate it. The vets had stayed away in droves. They didn't want to see Hollywood's sanitized version of the war they'd actually fought. There was one vet I remember more clearly than the others. His name was Danny Ortiz, and he'd been coming to the Starlight since early 1972. He drove a beat-up Volkswagen bus painted in faded psychedelic colors, a vehicle that seemed to embody the contradiction of being a hippie and a soldier at the same time. Danny always came alone. He'd park his van in the veteran section, open the back doors, and sit on the floor of the van with his legs dangling out, smoking cigarettes and watching the movie. He never bought concessions, never talked to anyone, never seemed to interact with the other vets even though he always parked near them. One night in the summer of '74, we were showing The Sting with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. I saw Danny's van pull into the lot, but something was different. There was someone with him. A woman, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair and a peasant dress. She looked nervous, uncertain, like she wasn't sure she wanted to be there. They parked in Danny's usual spot, and I watched as they sat in the front seats talking. The conversation looked intense. At one point, the woman put her hand on Danny's arm and he flinched away like she'd burned him. She pulled back, hurt on her face, and they sat there in silence while the movie started without them watching. About 20 minutes in, Danny got out of the van and started walking. Not toward the concession stand, not toward the exit. Just walking, packing along the back fence of the lot, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The woman stayed in the van, watching him through the windshield. That boy's gonna wear a hole in the ground, Dutch observed from the booth window. Should we do something? Like what? Tell him to stop packing. Tell him whatever's eating him will get better. Dutch shook his head. Some things you can't fix, Frank. Some things just have to run their course. But I couldn't just watch. I don't know why, maybe because I'd been watching people from this booth for nearly 20 years, and I'd developed a sense for when someone really needed help versus when they just needed space. Danny needed help. I told Dutch I was taking a break and headed down to the lot. It was risky. I'd never approached a customer like this before, never inserted myself into someone's private moment. But something told me Danny was standing on the edge of something bad, and maybe if someone just showed up, just stood with him for a minute, it might pull him back. I found him leaning against the back fence, staring out at the darkness beyond the lot. The highway was out there somewhere, its distant rumble a constant white noise beneath the movie soundtrack. "Hey," I said, keeping my distance, "you okay?" He didn't look at me. "Do I know you?" "I'm Frank, I run the projector, seen you here a lot over the years." "Yeah," he lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. "You keeping tabs on everyone or just the crazy vets?" "Just the people who love movies enough to come here every week." I leaned against the fence next to him, leaving a few feet of space between us. "That's a good movie tonight. The Sting. You missing it?" "Can't focus," he said. "Can't. I can't sit still anymore, can't relax, can't do any of the things normal people do." "Who's the woman in your van?" "My sister, she's worried about me, thinks I need help." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She's probably right." We stood in silence for a minute. On the screen, Paul Newman was conning someone. In the lot, families were eating popcorn. And here at the back fence, a young man who'd been to war was trying to figure out how to live in peacetime. "Can I tell you something," I said, "about this place?" "Sure, why not?" "For 20 years I've watched people come here. Families, couples, kids, old folks, and you know what I've learned? Everybody's carrying something, everybody's got weight on their shoulders. The difference is just how visible it is." Danny looked at me for the first time. His eyes were old in his young face. "What's your point?" "My point is, you're not as alone as you think. You're not as broken as you feel. And the fact that you showed up here tonight with your sister, the fact that you're trying, even when it's hard, that counts for something." "I didn't want to come," he said quietly. "She begged me, said I needed to get out of my apartment, needed to do something normal, but I don't know how to do normal anymore. I sit in that van with her and all I can think about is everything that happened over there, everything I did, everything I saw." "You don't have to forget it," I said. "You just have to find a way to live with it. And maybe part of that is letting people like your sister help carry some of the weight." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How do I do that? How do I let her in when everything inside me is—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "You start small," I said. "You sit in a van and watch a movie. You let her buy you popcorn. You talk about Paul Newman's smile or Robert Redford's hair. You do normal things even when they don't feel normal. And eventually, maybe, they start to feel a little bit more like they're supposed to." Danny dropped his cigarette and ground it out with his heel. "That easy, huh?" "I didn't say easy, I said possible." He looked back toward his van where his sister was still sitting, still waiting. "She's been so patient with me. Everyone else gave up, but she keeps showing up." "Then maybe you owe it to her to keep showing up too, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Danny nodded slowly, then started walking back toward the van. Halfway there, he turned and looked at me. "Thanks, projectionist." "Frank. Thanks, Frank." I watched him climb back into the van beside his sister, watched her turn to him with hope and relief on her face, watched them talk for a minute before settling in to watch the rest of the movie, his sister moving a little closer, Danny not pulling away this time. When I got back to the booth, Dutch was standing at the window. "You fix him?" he asked. "Nobody's that easy to fix," I said, "but maybe I helped a little." "That's all any of us can do," Dutch said, "help a little." Danny kept coming to the Starlight after that night, sometimes with his sister, sometimes alone. But when he came alone, he'd park near the other vets, and eventually I started seeing him talk to them, sitting on tailgates, sharing cigarettes, just being with people who understood. The veteran corner of the Starlight became something more than just a place to park. It became a support group, though nobody called it that. It became a place where guys who couldn't talk to their families or their therapists or their old friends could just exist with each other, where they didn't have to explain or justify or apologize, where they could watch Clint Eastwood shoot bad guys or Steve McQueen drive fast cars and nobody expected them to be anything other than what they were. I never knew what happened to most of those vets after the Starlight closed, but I like to think that the time they spent in that back corner, under the California stars, watching movies with people who'd been through the same hell, I like to think that helped them survive, that it gave them a place to land when they couldn't land anywhere else. The drive-in wasn't therapy, it wasn't a cure, but it was a refuge, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just having a place where you're welcome, where nobody judges you, where you can sit in the dark and forget yourself for a couple of hours, sometimes that's what saves your life. By the early 1980s, the writing was on the wall. Drive-in theaters across America were closing, their lots sold off to developers who saw more value in strip malls and apartment complexes than in outdoor movie screens. The Starlight was hanging on but barely. Attendance had dropped by half since the glory days of the 60s. The big movie studios were releasing their pictures to indoor theaters first, and by the time we got them, everyone who wanted to see them already had. Home video was the real killer. VCRs had become affordable, and suddenly people could watch movies in their living rooms whenever they wanted. No mosquitoes, no bad weather, no speaker static, no teenagers making out in the car next to you. Just pop in a tape, press play, and instant entertainment. Dutch was 73 years old in 1983, and I could see the fight going out of him. The Starlight had been his life for 30 years, but he was tired. Tired of fighting the economics, tired of competing with multiplexes and video stores, tired of watching his dreams slowly die. "We're not gonna make it another year," he told me one night in April, sitting in the projection booth while we waited for the sun to set. "The numbers don't work anymore, Frank. I'm bleeding money every week we stay open." I'd known it was coming, but hearing him say it out loud still hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you going to do?" "Sell the land. Developer's been after me for 2 years, wants to build condominiums. Says this location is prime real estate, whatever the hell that means. He looked out the window at the empty parking lot, the speaker posts standing like grave markers in the late afternoon light. 40 years I've been here, Frank, longer than you. I remember when Route 66 brought people through here every single day, when this drive-in was the only entertainment for 50 miles. Now look at it. Ghost town. When? I asked quietly. End of summer, Labor Day weekend. We'll close after that. 4 months. The Starlight Drive-In had 4 months left to live. The news spread through the community faster than I expected. People who hadn't been to the drive-in in years suddenly started showing up, wanting one last visit before it was gone. Former regulars came back, looking older, bringing their own kids or grandkids, pointing out where they used to park, telling stories about first dates and marriage proposals and summer nights that had happened decades ago. Caroline and Tommy drove up from Williams, Arizona, older now in their 60s but still together, still holding hands. They parked in their old spot and waved up at the projection booth, and I waved back, remembering the day I'd delivered that letter that had changed their lives. The Harrisons came back too, all 6 of them, even though the kids were in their 30s now with children of their own. They'd driven the old country Squire which Tom had kept running all these years, and they parked in their traditional spot and piled into the back like they used to, 3 generations crammed into one station wagon, laughing and crying and remembering. Danny Ortiz showed up in July driving that same VW bus, now even more faded and beaten than before. His sister was with him, and when they got out to visit the concession stand, I saw they were both wearing wedding rings. She'd married someone else, or maybe he'd married someone. Either way, they were both still here, still alive, still showing up for each other. All summer long, the Starlight filled with ghosts, not the dead kind, but the living kind. People who'd been shaped by this place, who carried memories of it, who wanted to say goodbye properly. Dutch decided we should go out with style. For the final weekend, Friday, Saturday and Sunday of Labor Day, we'd show classics, the movies that had defined the drive-in era. American Graffiti on Friday, Grease on Saturday, and for Sunday night, the last night the Starlight would ever operate, Dutch chose It's a Wonderful Life. It's not a summer movie, I pointed out, it's a Christmas movie. It's a movie about community, Dutch said, about how one person's life touches everyone around them, seems appropriate. That last weekend was like nothing I'd ever experienced. The parking lot was packed, not just full but overflowing, with cars parked on the grass outside the official spaces, people sitting on lawn chairs behind their vehicles, families spread out on blankets in any spot they could find. The local news came and filmed. The newspaper sent a reporter to interview Dutch and me, asking us to share our memories, to eulogize a dying American institution. Friday night's showing of American Graffiti felt perfect, a movie about the end of an era, about young people on the cusp of change, about saying goodbye to a way of life that couldn't last forever. When the movie ended with All Summer Long playing over the credits, I saw people crying in their cars, hugging each other, not wanting to let go. Saturday brought Grease, and the lot was full of people who'd been teenagers in the 50s, reliving their youth through Danny Zuko and Sandy Olsen. People sang along to Summer Nights and You're the One That I Want, and for a few hours the Starlight felt alive again, vibrant and magical and eternal. But Sunday was different. Sunday was goodbye. By 6 o'clock, 2 hours before the movie would start, the lot was already full. Dutch had to turn people away at the gate, something I'd never seen him do. Fire code, he said regretfully. Can't have more than 700 people on the property. 700 people had come to say goodbye to the Starlight Drive-In. I stood in the projection booth, looking out at the parking lot one last time, at all those cars and trucks and vans, at all those families and couples and individuals who'd chosen to spend their Sunday evening here, at the speaker posts that had crackled to life thousands of times, carrying voices and music and sound effects into the California night, at the concession stand where Dutch had sold 1 million bags of popcorn and 1 million boxes of candy. At the screen, that massive white rectangle that had held so many stories, so many dreams, so much light. Dutch climbed the stairs to the booth at 7:30, half an hour before showtime. He was dressed up, wearing a suit and tie, the first time I'd ever seen him in anything but casual clothes. He looked old and tired and sad, but also proud, like a captain going down with his ship, but going down with dignity. "You ready?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "You?" "Hell no." He stood beside me at the window, looking out at his kingdom. 35 years I've run this place, Frank, 35 years of summers. You know what I'm gonna miss most. What? This, he gestured at the parking lot, at all those people. This feeling of being the person who brought people together, who gave them a place to gather, to share something. I wasn't just selling movie tickets, Frank, I was selling community, belonging, shared experience. You gave people more than that, I said. You gave them memories, gave them a place where their lives could unfold, where they could fall in love and raise their kids and say goodbye to old friends and hello to new ones. This place mattered, Dutch, it really mattered. He nodded, his eyes wet. Thanks, kid. At 8 o'clock, as the sun set behind the screen and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Dutch picked up the microphone connected to all the speaker posts. His voice, amplified and echoing, filled the entire lot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Starlight Drive-In Theatre. For those of you who don't know, my name is Dutch Kowalski, and I've had the honor of being your host here for 35 years. Tonight is our final show, and I want to thank you, all of you, for being part of this place's story, for choosing to spend your evenings here, for trusting us with your dates and your families and your precious free time. He paused, and I could hear his voice breaking. A lot of you met your husbands or wives here. Some of you had your first kiss here. Some of you brought your children here and then your grandchildren. You've made this drive-in more than just a business, you've made it a home. And even though the Starlight is closing tonight, I want you to remember that what we had here doesn't have to end. The spirit of this place, the community, the kindness, the shared joy of experiencing something together that can live on if you carry it with you. He cleared his throat. Tonight we're showing It's a Wonderful Life, a movie about how every life touches other lives, how we're all connected in ways we can't always see. And that's what the Starlight has been, a connection point. A place where your life intersected with other lives, where your story became part of a bigger story. So thank you for 35 years of memories. Thank you for being part of the Starlight family. And remember, no man is a failure who has friends. We've all been friends here under these stars watching these movies, don't forget that. He set down the microphone and looked at me with tears streaming down his face. Start the movie, Frank. Let's give them one last show. I threaded the film. I'd done it 10,000 times, but my hands were shaking like it was my first night all over again. The projector hummed to life, and suddenly there was light streaming from the booth, cutting through the darkness, hitting that big screen and bringing it to life one final time. It's a Wonderful Life played to 700 people who knew they were witnessing an ending. Some watched the movie, some watched each other, some just sat in their cars and cried, mourning not just the Starlight but everything it represented, a slower time, a simpler way of connecting, an America that was disappearing piece by piece. When George Bailey ran through Bedford Falls shouting Merry Christmas, when Clarence got his wings, when the whole town showed up to save George with their pocket change and their love, the parking lot erupted in applause. 700 people clapping, honking their horns, flashing their headlights, not just for the movie but for what the movie meant, for the idea that community matters, that people need each other, that no man is a failure who has friends. The final credits rolled, the movie ended, and the Starlight Drive-In Theatre showed its last image, the end, in simple white letters on a black screen. I turned off the projector, the screen went dark, and the Starlight Drive-In, after 35 years of operation, after showing thousands of movies to hundreds of thousands of people, closed forever. But the cars didn't leave, not right away. People sat in the darkness, headlights off, engines quiet, just being together in this place one last time. Some got out and walked around, touching speaker posts, taking photographs, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Dutch and I stood at the projection booth window, watching, not saying anything, just bearing witness to the end of an era. Finally, around midnight, the last cars pulled out of the lot. The Harrisons were among the last to leave, the whole family standing outside their country squire, holding each other. Danny Ortiz and his sister sat on the hood of his VW bus for a long time, looking up at the dark screen. Caroline and Tommy drove past the concession stand slowly, like they were memorizing every detail. And then they were all gone, and it was just Dutch and me and an empty parking lot full of ghosts. Well, Dutch said, That's that, I agreed. We locked up the booth for the last time and walked down to the concession stand. Dutch pulled 2 beers from the old cooler that had kept drinks cold for 3 decades, and we sat on the curb in front of the dark screen, drinking in silence. What are you gonna do now? I asked. Retire for real, I guess, buy a condo in Florida like every other old man, play golf, get bored out of my mind. He looked at me. What about you? I don't know, I admitted. This is all I've known for 28 years. I don't know how to be anything but a projectionist. You're more than that, Dutch said. You're a witness. You watch people's lives unfold from that booth. You've got stories, Frank. Maybe it's time to tell them. We finished our beers and sat in the darkness under the California stars, 2 old men mourning a way of life that had died because the world had moved on, because technology had changed, because nothing beautiful lasts forever. But we'd been part of something important, something that mattered. And even though the Starlight was gone, what it had meant, the connections it had forged, the memories it had created, the love it had witnessed, that would live on in all the people who'd been touched by it. That would last forever. After the Starlight closed in September of 1983, I felt like a man who'd lost his purpose. For 28 years, my life had been defined by that projection booth, by the rhythm of threading film and timing changeovers, by the view from that window overlooking the parking lot. Dutch sold the land within a month. The developer moved fast. By November, bulldozers were tearing down the screen, ripping out the speaker posts, paving over the memories. I drove by once to watch, but I couldn't stand it. It felt like watching someone demolish a cathedral. I was 51 years old with a resume that said drive-in projectionist and nothing else. Who needed that skill in 1983? The few drive-ins still operating had their own projectionists, and indoor theaters had gone automated, didn't need the kind of hands-on expertise I'd spent 3 decades developing. I bounced around for a while, worked at a regular movie theater for 6 months, but it wasn't the same, just a dark room and strangers eating popcorn, no windows to watch through, no stories unfolding in parked cars. I tried working at a video rental store, but recommending tapes to people who'd watch them alone in their living rooms felt hollow. Finally, I did what Dutch had suggested that last night. I started writing down the stories. I'd never been much of a writer, barely graduated high school, spent most of my adult life working with my hands, not with words. But the stories were in me, pressing to get out, and if I didn't tell them, they'd die with me. All those moments I'd witnessed from the projection booth would disappear like they'd never happened. So I bought a typewriter at a garage sale and started typing. One finger at a time, Hunt and Peck style. I wrote about Caroline and her soldier, about Robert and Maggie and their proposal in Space 127, about the Harrison family and their Friday night station wagon summers, about the veterans in the back corner and the couple in the red Mustang, and all the 1,000 other stories I'd collected over nearly 3 decades. It took me 2 years to write it all down. 2 years of sitting at my kitchen table, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, trying to capture not just what I'd seen but how it had felt, trying to make people understand what the Starlight had been, what drive-in theaters had meant to America. When I finished, I had a manuscript 500 pages long. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't a writer who would want to read the memories of a drive-in projectionist, but Dutch's words echoed in my head. You're a witness. Maybe it's time to tell them. I sent the manuscript to a small local publisher in Riverside, didn't expect anything, but 3 months later I got a call. They wanted to publish it, not because they thought it would be a bestseller, they were honest about that, but because they believed it was important. A document of a disappearing America, an obituary for a way of life that had mattered. What the screen saw, 28 years at the Starlight Drive-In, was published in the spring of 1986. It sold maybe 3,000 copies, mostly in Southern California, not exactly a runaway success, but the letters started coming. People who'd been to the Starlight wrote to tell me they remembered those nights, those movies, those moments. People who'd never been to the Starlight but had their own drive-in memories wrote to thank me for preserving something they'd thought was lost. Historians and film scholars wrote to say they wanted to use my book in their research, that first-hand accounts like mine were rare and valuable. And then, in July of 1986, I got a letter that changed everything. It was from a woman named Patricia Brennan in Chicago, Illinois. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I opened the envelope and read. Dear Mr. Morrison, you don't know me, but you knew my mother. Her name was Judith Brennan, though by the time you met her in 1965, she'd taken back her maiden name after her divorce. My mother died last month after a long battle with cancer. While going through her papers, I found multiple copies of your book, What the Screen Saw, with passages underlined and notes in the margins. I also found letters between you and her from the late 1980s that I never knew existed. Mr. Morrison, my mother was a writer too. She wrote a book called The Mother Road, Stories from America's Highway, published in 1967. It was about Route 66, about the people who lived and worked along it. There's a chapter in her book about a mailman who carried letters up and down the highway, connecting people across distance. I believe you knew that mailman. His name was Harold Green. I'm writing because I think you and my mother were part of the same project without realizing it. You were both trying to document a disappearing America, to preserve the stories of ordinary people doing ordinary things that somehow added up to something extraordinary. My mother left instructions in her will. She wanted her archives donated to the National Route 66 Museum when it opens, and she specifically mentioned your name. She said, if you can find Frank Morrison, the projectionist from the Starlight Drive-In, tell him that his stories matter. Tell him he did what I was trying to do, he witnessed and he remembered, and tell him thank you for being a connection point even after the connections had been severed. I don't fully understand what she meant, but I thought you should know. I'm enclosing her address book. There are other names in it, people she interviewed, people whose stories she collected. Maybe some of them were people you knew too. Thank you for writing your book. Thank you for remembering. Patricia Brennan. I sat at my kitchen table with that letter in my hands, and suddenly everything connected. Judith Brennan had written about Harold Green, the Route 66 mailman. I'd never met her, but somehow we'd been doing the same work, collecting stories, preserving memories, bearing witness to an America that was vanishing. And Harold had mentioned her. In one of the letters that came after my book was published, a man had written to me from Amarillo, Texas. His name was Harold Green, and he'd said he'd spent 40 years as a mailman on Route 66. He'd said my book reminded him of his own project, his own attempt to document the Mother Road before it disappeared completely. We'd exchanged a few letters. He'd told me about Judith, about how she'd interviewed him in 1965, about how her book had included his stories. And now she was gone, and he was old, probably in his 80s by now, and we were the last ones left who remembered. I wrote back to Patricia immediately, thanking her for reaching out. And I wrote to Harold, telling him about Judith's death, about how she'd remembered both of us in her will, about how our separate projects had somehow been part of the same larger mission. Harold's response came 2 weeks later. His handwriting was shaky now, but his words were clear. Dear Frank, I'm sorry to hear about Judith. She was a remarkable woman with a remarkable vision. She understood what most people didn't, that the small stories matter as much as the big ones, that the waitress and the mailman and the projectionist are just as important to history as the presidents and the generals. You asked me in your letter what it all meant, this work we've done. Here's what I think. We were archivists of the ordinary. We paid attention to the moments that most people overlook, and we wrote them down so they wouldn't be forgotten. And now those moments are preserved, they exist, they matter. The Starlight is gone, Route 66 is disappearing, the world we knew is becoming memory, but we've created a record. We've said this happened, these people existed, these lives mattered. And that's not nothing, Frank, that's everything. You watched America through your projection booth window for 28 years. I carried America's letters for 40 years. Judith documented America's highway for decades. We were all doing the same thing, creating connections, preserving stories, being witnesses. Thank you for your book. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for understanding that what we saw through our windows, yours literal, mine metaphorical, was worth recording. The screen saw everything, Frank, and you made sure we'd never forget what it saw. With gratitude and respect. Harold Green. I kept that letter, framed it and hung it on my wall next to a photograph of the Starlight in its glory days, the parking lot full of cars, the screen glowing white against the night sky. Harold was right, we'd been archivists of the ordinary, and in a world that was changing faster than anyone could process, that mattered more than I'd realized. Over the next few years, I heard from more people who were doing similar work, oral historians recording the memories of Depression-era farmers, documentary filmmakers capturing the last days of small-town America, writers and photographers and archivists all trying to preserve something before it disappeared completely. We were a scattered network of witnesses, all of us trying to say the same thing: this mattered, these people mattered, don't let it all be forgotten. In 1995, the National Route 66 Museum opened in Clinton, Oklahoma. They invited me to the opening, asked me to be part of a panel discussion about life along the Mother Road. I almost didn't go. I was 63 years old by then, not used to public speaking, not comfortable being the center of attention. But I went, and when I walked into that museum and saw the exhibits, the photographs and artifacts and stories from all along Route 66, the recreation of a drive-in theatre with speaker posts and a miniature screen, I understood why Harold and Judith had been so insistent about preservation. This wasn't just nostalgia, this wasn't just old people clinging to the past. This was history, real history, the history of how ordinary Americans lived their lives, found joy, built communities, connected with each other. And part of that history came from my projection booth window, from the stories I'd witnessed and written down, from the 28 years I'd spent watching America fall in love, one car at a time. At the panel discussion, someone in the audience asked me, "Do you think drive-in theaters will ever come back?" I thought about it for a moment, thought about the economics and the technology and the way people consume entertainment now, thought about multiplexes and streaming services and how everyone watches movies alone on their phones. No, I said honestly, I don't think they'll come back the way they were, but I think the need they filled, the need for shared experiences, for communal gathering, for being together under the stars, that need doesn't go away. It just finds new forms, and maybe that's okay. Maybe nothing's supposed to last forever. Maybe what matters is that it existed at all and that we remember it. An old woman in the front row started crying. I met my husband at a drive-in, she said. 53 years ago, he died last year. Your book helped me remember him young, remember us young. Remember what it felt like to be so in love we couldn't see straight, sitting in a car under the stars, pretending to watch a movie we couldn't have told you the plot of if our lives depended on it. After the panel, she came up to me and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for being a witness, for writing it down, for making sure we're remembered." And I realized that's all any of us really want, to be remembered, to know that our lives meant something, that we were seen, that we existed in a way that mattered. The drive-in gave people that. For a few hours every week, they could sit in their cars and be part of something bigger than themselves. They could share the darkness with strangers who became neighbors. They could watch stories on a screen while living their own stories in the parking lot. And I got to watch it all from my window. I got to be the witness. In the summer of 2005, 20 years after the Starlight closed, someone decided to have a reunion. I was 73 years old by then, living in a small retirement community in Riverside, not far from where the drive-in used to stand. My health wasn't great: heart problems, arthritis, the usual complaints of an old man who'd spent too many years climbing projection booth stairs and breathing in cigarette smoke. But my mind was still sharp, and my memories of the Starlight were as vivid as ever. The reunion was organized by Tommy Harrison Jr., the oldest of the Harrison kids, the boy who'd sat in the front seat of that country squire station wagon all those Friday nights in the 1960s. He'd tracked me down through the publisher of my book, which was long out of print, but had developed a small cult following among drive-in enthusiasts and nostalgic baby boomers. "Mr. Morrison," he said on the phone, "I don't know if you remember my family, but we used to come to the Starlight every Friday night when I was a kid. My dad's name was Tom, my mom was Dottie." "I remember," I interrupted. "Space in the center section. You'd back in the station wagon, open the tailgate for the kids. Your mom had a suitcase full of supplies." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Then you remember us." "I remember everyone," I said, and it was true. Even after all these years, I could close my eyes and see that parking lot, could identify cars by their regular spots, could recall the habits and patterns of the people who'd made the Starlight part of their lives. "That's incredible," Tommy said. "Mr. Morrison, I'm organizing a reunion for people who used to come to the Starlight. It's going to be on the lot where it used to stand, well, in the parking lot of the shopping center that's there now. We're going to set up a temporary screen, rent a projector, show a movie the way we used to. Would you consider coming, maybe even running the projector for old time's sake?" My first instinct was to say no. I was too old, too tired, too far removed from that life. But then I thought about all those people I'd watched through my window, all those stories I'd witnessed, and I thought about how rare it is in life to get a chance to go back, to revisit something that mattered, to see the people whose lives intersected with yours even if they never knew you were watching. "I'll be there," I said. The reunion was scheduled for a Saturday night in August, at the same time of year when the Starlight would have been in full swing. Tommy had done his homework. He'd gotten permission from the shopping center management, rented a large inflatable movie screen and a digital projector, arranged for food trucks and a small stage for people to share their memories. I arrived early, before the sun set, and stood in the parking lot trying to orient myself. The Walmart was where the concession stand used to be. The Starbucks was roughly where the projection booth had stood. The movie screen had been. I walked to the back of the lot where a Home Depot now occupied the space, right about there, right where the lumber section was now. That's where the screen had stood for 35 years. "Mr. Morrison." I turned and saw a man in his 50s, balding, carrying a little extra weight, but with kind eyes that reminded me of someone. "Tommy." "Yes, sir." He shook my hand warmly. "Thank you so much for coming. You have no idea what this means to people." "Your parents?" I asked. His smile faltered. "Dad passed away in 1998. Heart attack. Mom's still with us though. She's coming tonight. She's 83 now, in a wheelchair, but she wouldn't miss this for anything." As the sun began to set, cars started arriving. Not the cars I remembered. No station wagons with wood paneling, no hot rods with chrome, no powder blue Bel Airs. These were modern vehicles, SUVs and minivans and sedans, but the people getting out of them, the people I recognized. Not by their faces necessarily. Everyone was older, grayer, heavier or thinner, marked by time and life, but by something else. By the way they looked around the parking lot with wonder and sadness. By the way they found each other and embraced, reconnecting after decades. By the way they pointed at empty spaces and said, "We used to park right there." Dottie Harrison arrived in a van with a wheelchair lift, accompanied by her daughter Susan and the twins, Bobby and Betty. When Tommy wheeled her into the parking lot, she looked around with tears streaming down her face. "It's gone," she said. "It's all gone." "But we're here, Mom," Tommy said gently. "We remember." I walked over to introduce myself, though I wasn't sure she'd know who I was. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm Frank Morrison. I was the projectionist." She looked up at me with those same eyes I'd seen through the windshield of a country squire 40 years ago. Eyes that had been young and hopeful and sometimes sad. Eyes that had watched her children grow up in the back of a station wagon. Now they were old eyes, but they were still kind. "The projectionist," she repeated. Then her face changed, recognition dawning. "You watched us all those Friday nights. You watched us from that booth." "I did," I admitted. "I hope that doesn't seem creepy. I watched everyone. It was my window to the world." She reached up and took my hand. "You were part of our family tradition, even though we never met you. Tom used to point up at the booth sometimes and say, 'That man up there, he's the reason the magic works.' He respected you. We all did." More people arrived as the evening deepened. I saw faces I recognized from 40, 50 years ago. A woman who'd been a teenager in the 1960s, who used to come with her boyfriend in a red Mustang, not the same couple Dutch and I had protected, but another couple entirely. She was in her 70s now, a widow, she told me, but she'd brought her grandchildren to show them where she'd fallen in love. A man who'd been a little boy in the 1950s, who'd watched Disney movies from the back of his parents' Ford while wearing pajamas. He was retirement age now, but he remembered every detail of those nights: the scratchy sound from the speaker, the smell of his mother's coffee from a thermos, the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder during scary scenes. A veteran, not Danny Ortiz, but one of the other guys who'd gathered in that back corner in the early 70s. He'd brought his wife and adult children, wanted them to understand that the Starlight had been his refuge, his healing place, the spot where he'd learned to be around people again after Vietnam. The stories poured out as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Tommy had set up a microphone on the small stage and people took turns sharing their memories. First kisses and marriage proposals, family traditions and summer rituals, the time someone's car wouldn't start and half the lot stopped to help, the night a bat flew through an open window and chaos ensued, the evening a marriage proposal appeared on the screen between movies and everyone honked their horns in celebration. Story after story, memory after memory, all of them testifying to the same truth: the Starlight had mattered. This place, this simple parking lot with a screen and some speakers, had been woven into the fabric of their lives. And then Tommy called me to the stage. "Mr. Morrison was the projectionist at the Starlight for 28 years, he announced. He watched all of us from his booth, and he wrote a book about what he saw, preserving our stories so they wouldn't be forgotten. Mr. Morrison, would you share some memories with us?" I made my way to the stage slowly, my arthritic knees protesting every step. When I reached the microphone, I looked out at the crowd, maybe 200 people, maybe more, all of them scattered across this parking lot that used to be their gathering place. "I don't know what to say," I began, and my voice cracked with emotion. "For 28 years I watched you through that projection booth window. I saw your first dates and your family nights. I saw your joy and your heartbreak. I saw you fall in love and raise your children and grow old. And I never told you, but every single one of you mattered to me." I had to stop and wipe my eyes. The crowd was silent, waiting. "You probably thought I was just up there threading film, keeping the projector running. And I was, but I was also bearing witness to your lives, to the real movie that was happening in the parking lot while other movies played on the screen. And that movie, your movie, was better than anything Hollywood ever produced. It was real, it was beautiful, it was everything that makes life worth living." I looked around at their faces, at these people who'd been strangers to me even though I'd watched them for decades. "The Starlight is gone," I continued. "We can't bring it back, but what it represented, community, connection, shared experience, that doesn't have to die. That's up to us. We can choose to gather, to remember, to tell our stories to the next generation. We can choose to look up from our phones and see each other. We can choose to sit together under the stars and share something beautiful." I paused, then added, "Dutch Kowalski, the owner of the Starlight, told me something on our last night. He said that every life touches other lives, that we're all connected in ways we can't always see. The Starlight was proof of that. All of you sitting in your cars, living your separate lives but somehow together, connected by darkness and starlight and flickering images on a screen." "Thank you," I said finally. "Thank you for letting me be part of your stories. Thank you for being part of mine. Thank you for remembering." The applause that followed was long and warm and full of tears. People stood, not in the polite way audiences stand for mediocre performances, but in the genuine way people rise when something true has been spoken. After I stepped off the stage, people lined up to talk to me, to shake my hand, to tell me their specific stories, the ones they wanted me to know. A woman who'd gotten engaged in Space 127, not Robert and Maggie, but another couple entirely, because that space had become legendary, a good luck spot that people requested for special occasions. A man who'd been a troubled teenager until Dutch had given him a job at the concession stand, taught him responsibility, gave him a second chance. A woman who'd been a single mother in the 1970s, who'd brought her kids to the Starlight every week because it was cheap entertainment and they'd all loved it. and those nights had been some of the happiest of her life. Each story was a thread, and together they wove a tapestry that showed what the Starlight had really been, not just a business, not just a movie theatre, but a community centre, a gathering place, a spot where people's lives intersected and connected, where memories were made, where America lived its life. When full darkness fell, Tommy started the projector. The inflatable screen lit up with the opening credits of American Graffiti, the same movie we'd shown on our next to last night in 1983. It was a fitting choice, a movie about the end of an era, about young people saying goodbye to a way of life that couldn't last. People sat on lawn chairs or on the hoods of their cars just like old times. Some brought blankets and sat on the ground. Kids who'd never experienced a drive-in ran around in excitement, their parents trying to explain what it had been like, how the speakers worked, how you'd fog up the windows on cold nights. I sat in a lawn chair in the back, roughly where the projection booth would have been, and watched, not the movie but the people, the way they laughed together at the jokes, the way they sang along to the songs, the way they reached for each other in the darkness, holding hands, sharing popcorn, being together. And I realized this was what I'd missed most, not running the projector, not the mechanical work of showing movies, but this, being part of something that brought people together, being the invisible hand that made the magic happen while real magic happened in front of the screen. Near the end of the movie, Dottie Harrison wheeled herself over to where I was sitting. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I wanted to tell you something I never got to say." "What's that?" "That night in 1962 when Tom and I were fighting, when we walked to the back fence and almost gave up on each other, you were watching, weren't you?" I nodded, embarrassed. I'm sorry if that feels like an invasion of." "Don't apologize," she interrupted. "I'm glad you were watching because someone should have witnessed that moment. The moment we chose to stay together, the moment we chose our family, that moment mattered, Mr. Morrison. It determined the next 40-some years of our lives, and I'm glad someone saw it. I'm glad it was recorded, even if only in your memory." She reached out and squeezed my hand. Tom and I had 43 years together after that night. We raised 4 children, we saw them grow up and have children of their own, we had a good life, and it all could have ended that night at the Starlight, but it didn't. We chose to keep going, and every Friday after that, when we came back to the drive-in, it was like renewing our vows, like saying, yes, we still choose this, we still choose us. Tears were running down her weathered face. "Thank you for watching, thank you for remembering, thank you for understanding that what happened in that parking lot was just as important as what happened on the screen." I couldn't speak. I just held her hand and nodded, and we sat together in the darkness, 2 old people who'd been connected by a drive-in theatre 40 years ago, finally meeting properly, finally acknowledging the invisible thread that had bound our stories together. The reunion lasted until after midnight. When it finally ended, people were reluctant to leave, lingering in the parking lot, exchanging phone numbers and email addresses, promising to stay in touch, to do this again, to not let another 20 years pass before reconnecting. Tommy walked me to my car. "Mr. Morrison, thank you. This wouldn't have been the same without you." "Thank you for organizing it," I said, "for remembering, for caring enough to bring everyone together." "I learned it from my parents," he said. "They taught me that rituals matter, that showing up matters, that choosing to be together even when it's easier to be separate, that's what builds a life." I drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside, past the spot where the Starlight used to be, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the peace of endings, but the peace of knowing that what you did mattered, that the invisible work of bearing witness, of remembering, of preserving stories, that work has value. The drive-in was gone, but its legacy lived on in all those people who'd gathered tonight, who'd chosen to remember together, who'd understood that their shared history was worth celebrating. From my projection booth window, I'd watched America live its life for 28 years. And America, it turned out, had been watching back. The years after the reunion passed more quickly than I wanted them to. Time has a way of accelerating when you're old, when you've got more past than future, when every day feels both precious and ordinary. I stayed in my small apartment in the retirement community, spending my days reading, taking walks when my knees allowed it, and writing. I'd started a second book, not about the Starlight specifically, but about what I'd learned from watching people through that projection booth window, about love and loss, about community and connection, about what makes a life meaningful. I never finished it. Some things aren't meant to be finished, I suppose. They're just meant to be started, to occupy your thoughts, to give you purpose. By 2010, I was 78 years old and failing. The doctors had words for it: congestive heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the accumulated damage of years of smoking and breathing in film chemical fumes. But what it meant in plain English was that I was dying, slowly but inevitably. The hospice nurse who came to check on me twice a week, was a young woman named Maria. She was maybe 30, with kind eyes and gentle hands, and she reminded me of all the young people I'd watched at the Starlight over the years, full of hope, believing the world was still good despite all evidence to the contrary. "Mr. Morrison," she said one afternoon in October, "is there anyone I should call? Family, friends?" "No family," I said. "Never married, no kids. Most of my friends are dead." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I had a good life, a full life. I watched thousands of people live their lives, and in a way, all those lives were mine too." She didn't understand, but she nodded kindly. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can get you?" "Actually," I said, "there is something. In my closet there's a box, brown cardboard, kind of beat up. Could you bring it to me?" She retrieved the box and set it on the table beside my bed. Inside were all my treasures from the Starlight years, photographs of the drive-in in its glory days, ticket stubs I'd saved, letters from people who'd read my book, the note that Maggie Chen had pressed against her windshield in 1957, "Thank you for being part of our night," Harold Green's letter about being archivists of the ordinary, Dottie Harrison's Christmas card from 2006, with a photo of her entire family, 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren, all descendants of that Friday night tradition at the Starlight. "These are beautiful," Maria said, carefully looking through the contents. "Are these your memories?" "They're America's memories," I said. "I just held on to them." Over the next few weeks, as I grew weaker, I'd ask Maria to pull items from the box and I'd tell her the stories. About Caroline and Tommy, about Robert and Maggie, about the Harrison family, about the veterans, about Dutch and his fierce protection of everyone who came through his gates, about the couple in the red Mustang and the night Dutch stood up to drunks who wanted to cause trouble. Maria listened to every story, and I could see them affecting her, giving her something, a connection to a past she'd never experienced, to a way of life she'd only heard about. "It sounds magical," she said one day. "The drive-in, the way you describe it, it sounds like something out of a fairy tale." "It wasn't perfect," I said. "People fought sometimes, cars broke down, speakers malfunctioned, kids got sick, couples broke up. Life happened in that parking lot, and life is messy. But there was something about it, about being together under the stars, about sharing an experience, about being part of a community. We've lost that mostly. Everyone's in their own little bubble now." "Maybe," Maria said thoughtfully, "but maybe it still exists in different forms. Maybe people still gather, just differently. Maybe the drive-in spirit lives on even without drive-ins." I hoped she was right. In early December, I got a visitor I wasn't expecting. Tommy Harrison Jr. drove down from Los Angeles, where he'd been living and working as an architect. He was 60 now, grey-haired, wearing glasses, but I could still see the boy who'd sat in the front seat of that country squire, manning the speaker. "Mr. Morrison," he said, sitting in the chair beside my bed, "I heard you weren't doing well. I wanted to see you, to say goodbye properly." "You didn't have to drive all this way." "Yes, I did. You were part of my childhood, even though we never really met until the reunion. You were part of what made those Friday nights magical, and I wanted to tell you something." He pulled out his phone, one of those fancy smartphones that can do everything, and showed me a photograph. It was a drive-in theatre, brand new, with a massive screen and modern speaker technology. "There's a movement," Tommy said. "People are rebuilding drive-ins, not everywhere, but in some places. Small operations run by people who remember what they used to be, who want to recreate that experience. This one opened last year in Texas, and there are others in Missouri, in Pennsylvania, in Florida. The drive-in isn't dead, Mr. Morrison, it's being reborn." I looked at the photograph through tears I couldn't control. "Really?" "Really, and I'm going to build one too, here in Southern California. I've already bought the land. I'm calling it the Starlight Revival. And when it opens, there's going to be a plaque dedicating it to the memory of Dutch Kowalski and Frank Morrison, the men who understood that drive-ins weren't just about movies, they were about bringing people together." "Tommy, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know that what you witnessed, what you preserved in your book, it mattered. It inspired people. It reminded us of something we'd lost, and now we're trying to bring it back." He stayed for an hour telling me about his plans, about how he'd design the concession stand to look like the original Starlights, about how he'd use modern digital projection but keep the retro aesthetic, about how he'd create a space where families could gather, where couples could fall in love, where communities could come together under the stars. After he left, I lay in my bed and thought about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. I'd never had children, never built anything with my hands, never accomplished anything the world would consider significant, but I'd watched, I'd remembered, I'd written it down, and somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. That had mattered. A week before Christmas, I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange clarity. I knew the way you sometimes just know that I didn't have much time left, maybe days, maybe just hours. I asked Maria, who was staying overnight to monitor me, to do me a favor. Anything, Mr. Morrison? In that box, there's an envelope addressed to the future. It's my last letter. I wrote it 10 years ago, but I never sent it because there was no one to send it to. I want you to have it. And when you read it, I want you to understand that it's not just for you, it's for everyone, for anyone who needs to hear it. She took the envelope with trembling hands. Should I read it now? After I'm gone, I said, not before. That night I dreamed of the starlight, not as it was at the end, tired and fading, but as it had been in its glory days. The parking lot full of cars, the screen glowing white in the darkness, the sound of laughter and car horns and children's voices drifting through the summer air. In my dream I was young again, standing at the projection booth window watching the lot, and everyone I'd ever seen was there. Caroline and Tommy sitting close together in their powder blue Bel Air, Robert and Maggie on the hood of their car newly engaged, the Harrison family in their station wagon, all 6 of them piled in the back, the veterans in their corner finding peace in the darkness, the couple in the red Mustang holding hands without fear. And Dutch was there too, standing beside me at the window. You done good, kid, he said. You watched them, you remembered them, you made sure their stories didn't die. Did it matter? I asked. Did any of it matter? He smiled. Look at them, Frank. Look at all of them down there, living their lives, loving each other, being together. You were part of that. You made the magic happen. Of course it mattered. I looked out at the parking lot one last time, at all those lives I'd witnessed, all those stories I'd collected, all those moments I'd preserved. And I felt something I'd been searching for my entire life, completion. The sense that I'd done what I was meant to do, that my life had had purpose. The movie on the screen was ending, the credits were rolling, and it was time to turn off the projector. I died on December 23, 2010, peacefully in my sleep, with Maria holding my hand. She told me later, well, she told others, since I wasn't there to hear it, that my last words were, "The screen is dark now, it's time to go home." Maria opened my letter 3 days after I died, sitting alone in her apartment after working a double shift. She told this story later at a memorial service that Tommy Harrison organized, where 200 people gathered to remember a projectionist most of them had never met. This is what the letter said. Dear friend, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. The final reel has played, the lights have come up, and Frank Morrison has left the projection booth for the last time. I spent 55 years thinking about what I'd seen through that window, 55 years trying to understand what it meant, and here at the end, I think I finally know. Life is a drive-in movie. We all pull into the lot in our separate cars, carrying our separate stories, living our separate lives, and for a little while, 2 hours, 28 years, 80 years, however long we get, we gather in the darkness together. We share the same sky, watch the same screen, exist in the same space. Some of us come with family, some come alone, some find love in that parking lot, some lose it, but for that brief time we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We are part of a community, a gathering, a shared experience. And then the movie ends, the lights come up, we drive away back to our separate lives, but we carry something with us, the memory of being together, the knowledge that for a little while we weren't alone. That's what the Starlight taught me. That's what 40 years of watching people taught me. We need each other. We need to gather. We need to look up from our individual screens and see each other's faces. We need to sit in the darkness together and remember that we're all part of the same story. The drive-ins are mostly gone now. The world has moved on. But the need they filled, the hunger for connection, for community, for shared experience that hasn't gone away, it's still there. We just have to choose to feed it. So here's my final delivery to you. Don't let the movie end without telling the people you love that you love them. Don't let the lights come up before you've really seen the people sitting beside you. Don't drive away without carrying some of the magic with you. And when you can, gather, come together, share something beautiful. Sit under the stars and remember that we're all temporary, we're all fragile, we're all just trying to make sense of this brief, beautiful, heartbreaking existence. The screen is dark now, but the stars are still there. The parking lot is empty, but the memories remain. The starlight is gone, but what it stood for, connection, community, love that can live forever if we choose to carry it forward. Thank you for being part of the story. Thank you for sitting in the darkness with me. Thank you for letting me watch your lives unfold. Drive safe, friends, and don't forget to look up at the stars. With love from the last projectionist, Frank Morrison, The Starlight Drive-In Theatre, 1955-1983. Where America fell in love, one car at a time. This is Maria speaking now. Maria Rodriguez, the hospice nurse who sat with Frank Morrison during his final weeks. He asked me to finish his story if he couldn't, to carry his words forward one last time. So here I am, speaking for a man who spent his life watching others, finally getting to tell the end of the tale. Frank's memorial service was held on a Saturday in January 2011. Tommy Harrison organized it, and he chose a location that felt right, the parking lot of that shopping center where the Starlight once stood, right there between the Walmart and the Starbucks, where decades ago people had gathered under the stars to watch movies and live their lives. Over 300 people came. Some I recognized from the reunion 5 years earlier, older now, slower, but still showing up. Others I'd never seen before, people who'd read Frank's book or heard his story, people who wanted to pay respects to a man who'd understood something important about what it means to be human. There was no body, no casket. Frank had requested cremation, said he didn't want people staring at his corpse when they could be looking at each other instead. So Tommy set up a small memorial display, photographs of the Starlight in its glory days, Frank's projectionist jacket from the 1960s, the box of letters and artifacts he'd treasured, and an old film reel, the last reel Frank had ever run, the final frames of It's a Wonderful Life from that closing night in September 1983. People took turns sharing their memories, not just memories of Frank, most of them had never met him, but memories of the Starlight, of the role it had played in their lives, of the moments that had unfolded in that parking lot, witnessed by a projectionist they'd never spoken to but who'd seen them anyway. An elderly woman told the story of how she'd brought her autistic son to the Starlight every week in the 1970s because it was one of the few places he felt comfortable, where he could experience movies without the overwhelming sensory input of an indoor theater. Frank had noticed, she said, had made sure to run family-friendly films, had kept the volume slightly lower than normal. He'd never said anything to her, but she'd known, she'd felt seen. A man in his 50s talked about being a closeted gay teenager in the 1970s, coming to the Starlight alone because it was the only place he felt safe, sitting in the back row watching movies, dreaming of a future where he could be himself. Years later, he'd read Frank's book and found his own story in it, not specifically, but in the way Frank had written about the drive-in as a refuge for people who didn't fit anywhere else. Dottie Harrison was there, now 88 years old, still in her wheelchair. Her children wheeled her to the microphone, and she spoke in a voice that was soft but steady. Frank Morrison never said more than a few words to me in all the years we came to the Starlight, but he saw us, he saw my family, he saw the night my marriage almost ended and then didn't, he saw my children grow up, he saw us choose each other week after week, year after year, and he remembered, he wrote it down, he made sure our story wouldn't be forgotten. That's a gift beyond measure. She paused, looking around at the parking lot at the shopping center that had replaced the drive-in. The Starlight is gone, but what Frank taught us, that watching matters, that remembering matters, that bearing witness to each other's lives is holy work, that's still here, and we can carry it forward if we choose to. After the service, as people were leaving, Tommy Harrison pulled me aside. "Maria, there's something I want to show you, can you come with me?" We drove for about 20 minutes, heading east out of Riverside, until we reached a large, empty lot on the outskirts of town. Tommy pulled over and we got out of the car. "This is it," he said. "This is where the Starlight Revival is going to be." I looked at the empty land, just dirt and scrub brush and California sunshine, but Tommy was seeing something else. He walked across the lot, gesturing as he talked. "The screen will go there 60 feet wide. The concession stand here, designed to look like the original Starlights. 400 parking spaces, all with modern speakers, but also the option for old-style window speakers for people who want the authentic experience. We're going to use digital projection, clearer, more reliable, but we're keeping everything else as close to the original as possible." "When will it open?" I asked. "Summer of 2012 if everything goes according to plan. And Maria, I want you to be here for opening night. Frank would have wanted you there." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. "He changed my life," Tommy continued. "Not through anything he said to me, we barely spoke, but through what he represented, through the way he paid attention, through the way he made the ordinary sacred by really seeing it, really remembering it. I want to build something that honors that, a place where people can still gather under the stars, where they can still sit in their cars and share an experience, where they can still feel part of something bigger than themselves." Over the next 18 months, I watched the Starlight Revival take shape. Tommy sent me photos as construction progressed, the massive screen rising against the sky, the concession stand taking form, the speaker posts being installed in neat rows across the lot. And on a warm Saturday night in June of 2012, the Starlight Revival opened its gates for the first time. I arrived early at Tommy's invitation. The lot was already filling up with cars, families in minivans, couples in sedans, teenagers in whatever vehicles they could borrow. Some were people who remembered the original Starlight. Others were too young to have experienced the drive-in era, but they'd heard the stories, read Frank's book, wanted to be part of something their parents and grandparents had loved. Tommy had created something that honored the past while embracing the present. The digital projection was crystal clear, but the aesthetic was pure 1960s, vintage signs, retro lettering, the kind of design that made you feel like you'd stepped back in time. The concession stand sold traditional drive-in fare, popcorn, candy, hot dogs, but they also sold gourmet food truck offerings for the modern palate. At 7:30, as the sun began to set, Tommy stepped up to a microphone on a small stage in front of the concession stand. The lot was packed, every space full, more cars than even the original Starlight could have held. "Welcome," Tommy said, his voice carrying across the lot through speakers mounted on every post. "Welcome to the Starlight Revival. For those of you who don't know the story, this drive-in is named after the original Starlight Theatre, which operated from 1948 to 1983 in Riverside. My family spent 8 years going there every Friday night. It was our tradition, our gathering place, our shared ritual." He paused, looking out at all the cars, all the people who'd shown up for this moment. The original Starlight was run by a man named Dutch Kowalski and a projectionist named Frank Morrison. Dutch believed that drive-ins weren't just about showing movies, they were about bringing communities together. And Frank spent 28 years watching this community from his projection booth, bearing witness to our lives, preserving our stories so they wouldn't be forgotten. Tommy gestured toward the projection booth, a small building near the back of the lot, designed to look exactly like the original. Frank passed away in 2010, he never got to see this place, but his spirit is here. His understanding that watching matters, that remembering matters, that creating spaces where people can gather under the stars matters, that's the foundation of the Starlight Revival. He pulled out a plaque that would be mounted on the projection booth wall. It read, "In memory of Dutch Kowalski, 1910-1998, and Frank Morrison, 1932-2010, who understood that drive-in theaters weren't just about movies. They were about bringing America together, one car at a time. The screen saw everything, we made sure you'd never forget what it saw." The crowd erupted in applause, honking their horns, flashing their headlights, the traditional drive-in salute. "Tonight," Tommy continued, "we're showing the same movie that played on the original Starlight's final night. It's a Wonderful Life. Because that's what Frank taught us, that every life is wonderful, every story matters, every connection counts. So welcome, park your cars, hang your speakers, and let's remember what it feels like to gather together under the stars." The movie started as darkness fell completely. That familiar opening, the prayers rising from Bedford Falls, the angel getting his assignment. I sat in my car, a modest Honda Civic, and watched George Bailey's life unfold on that enormous screen. But like Frank before me, I found myself watching the audience as much as the movie. Watching families arrange blankets in the backs of their vehicles, watching couples move closer together as the night cooled, watching teenagers trying to look cool while secretly enjoying themselves, watching elderly people who remembered the original drive-in era, tears streaming down their faces, transporting back to their youth. During intermission, I walked around the lot. I heard snatches of conversation. "My grandparents used to come to drive-ins. This is better than a regular movie theater. Can we come back next week? I wish every night could be like this." Near the back of the lot, I saw something that made me stop. A young couple, maybe mid-20s, sitting on the hood of their car, not watching the movie, just talking. Intensely, seriously, the way people talk when something important is being said. And then I saw him pull out a small box, saw her hands fly to her mouth, saw him open the box to reveal a ring that caught the light from the screen. I stood there in the shadows, watching this moment unfold, and I thought, Frank would have loved this. He would have stood at his projection booth window watching this proposal, adding it to his collection of stories, remembering it, preserving it. And then I realized I could do that. I could be the witness now. I could remember. I could carry forward what Frank had started. When the movie ended, when George Bailey was saved by his community, when Clarence got his wings, when everyone was reminded that no man is a failure who has friends, the lot erupted again in applause and horn honks and headlight flashes. The cars began to file out slowly, reluctantly, nobody wanting the night to end. But they'd be back, I could tell. They'd found something they didn't know they were missing. A place to gather, a ritual to share, a way to be together that didn't involve staring at individual screens in individual rooms. Tommy found me as I was getting ready to leave. "What did you think?" "I think Frank would be proud," I said. "I think he'd say you got it right, the magic is back." "Will you come back?" he asked. "Will you make this your place the way people made the original Starlight their place?" "I will," I promised. And I did. For the next few years, I went to the Starlight Revival almost every week. I brought my own family, my sister and her kids, my parents, my friends. I watched them fall in love with the experience the way people had fallen in love with the original Starlight. But more than that, I started writing down what I saw, just like Frank had done. I kept a journal of the stories unfolding in that parking lot, the proposals and the family traditions and the first dates and the healing moments. I became a witness, an archivist of the ordinary, a keep of stories. Because Frank taught me something important: the small moments matter, the everyday connections matter, the seemingly insignificant rituals that bring us together, they're not insignificant at all, they're everything. In 2015, on what would have been Frank's 83rd birthday, Tommy organized a special event at the Starlight Revival. He invited everyone who'd been part of Frank's life, who'd been touched by his book, who understood what he'd tried to preserve. We showed a documentary that had been made about drive-in theaters, featuring interviews with projectionists and owners and customers from all across America. And at the end, there was a segment about Frank, about his book, about his role as a witness to American life. The narrator read from Frank's final letter, the one he'd given me before he died. And as those words echoed across the parking lot, I looked around and saw people crying, saw them holding each other, saw them understanding in that moment that they were part of something larger than themselves. Life is a drive-in movie, the narrator read. We all pull into the lot in our separate cars, carrying our separate stories, living our separate lives, and for a little while we gather in the darkness together. After the documentary ended, Tommy took the microphone one last time. Frank Morrison watched us for 28 years, he said. He saw our joys and our sorrows, he witnessed our loves and our losses, and he wrote it all down so we'd remember, so we'd know that our lives mattered, that we mattered. He paused, looking up at the projection booth where a light was burning, a memorial light that stayed on whenever the drive-in was open, a tribute to the projectionist who'd watched from his window for so long. The screen is never really dark, Tommy said. As long as we remember, as long as we gather, as long as we choose to sit together under the stars and share our stories, the light continues. Frank's light, the Starlight's light, the light of human connection that can never truly be extinguished. The horn honking and headlight flashing that followed was the loudest I'd ever heard. Hundreds of cars, thousands of people, all of them saying the same thing: we remember, we were here, we matter. I'm 63 years old now, in the year 2045. The Starlight Revival is still operating, though Tommy retired years ago and handed it over to his daughter, who runs it with the same love and dedication her father had. Drive-in theaters never fully came back the way they were in the 1950s and 60s, but they didn't disappear completely either. All across America, there are small drive-ins kept alive by people who understand what they represent, who understand that we need places to gather, who understand that the hunger for shared experience, for community, for sitting together under the stars, that hunger is eternal. I've spent 33 years going to the Starlight Revival. I've watched my nieces and nephews grow up there. I've seen them bring their own children. I've witnessed proposals and family reunions and anniversaries celebrated on car hoods under the California sky. And I've written it all down, every story, every moment, every connection I've witnessed from my spot in the parking lot, not from a projection booth window like Frank, but from ground level, part of the community instead of watching it from above. Last week, a publisher contacted me. They'd heard about my journals, my decades of observation at the Starlight Revival. They wanted to publish them. They said my work was important, that it documented how the drive-in spirit survived into the 21st century, how community persisted even as the world grew more isolated. I said yes, not for fame or money, I'm too old to care about those things, but because Frank taught me that bearing witness matters, that remembering matters, that the stories of ordinary people living ordinary lives add up to something extraordinary. My book will be called The Light Returns, Stories from the Starlight Revival. It will be published next summer, on what would have been Frank Morrison's 113th birthday. And in the dedication, I'll write, "For Frank Morrison, who taught me to watch. For Dutch Kowalski, who taught us to gather. For everyone who ever sat in a car to drive in and felt, even for a moment, less alone. The screen saw everything. And we remembered." So that's the end of Frank Morrison's story, or maybe it's just a comma, not a period, because stories don't really end as long as someone's still telling them. The Starlight Drive-In closed in 1983, but its spirit lives on. Frank Morrison died in 2010, but his witness continues. Dutch Kowalski passed away in 1998, but his vision of community persists. All across America, in small towns and suburbs, people still gather under the stars to watch movies from their cars. The technology has changed, the world has changed, but the deep human need to be together, to share something beautiful, to look up from our individual lives and remember we're part of something larger that hasn't changed at all. So if you ever find yourself near a drive-in theatre, go buy a ticket, park your car, hang the speaker on your window or tune your radio to the broadcast frequency. Watch the movie, yes, but also watch the people around you. Notice them, see them, bear witness to their lives. And remember Frank Morrison, the projectionist who understood that the real movie was always happening in the parking lot, not on the screen. Remember that watching matters. Remember that connection matters. Remember that we're all just driving through this life together, trying to find our way in the darkness, guided by the light of a shared screen and the kindness of strangers who become neighbors, who become friends, who become family. The starlight may be gone, but the stars remain. The drive-in may have closed, but the dream continues. And somewhere, I like to think Frank Morrison is still watching, still bearing witness, still remembering. Still making sure that what we saw, what we felt, what we shared together in those parking lots under those California skis, that it all meant something. That it mattered. That we mattered. Drive safe, friends. Look up at the stars. And don't forget to gather. Don't ever forget to gather.